project mate Harshita is going to be displaying a project on information visualization, which is dissecting the complex interplay of suicide rates, methods, gun laws in the US. Suicide is a pressing public issue, and it can devastate families and communities across the United States. With its rising number, it becomes important to understand the factors that plays into it. So our data visualization project aims to shed light on the complex interplay between suicide rates, various methods, and gun laws across the United States.
So as you can see that we have tried to summarize all the suicide rate per 100,000 across the years 1999 to 2020 in the United States. So we can see that there is an increasing trend. So suicide has been increasing year by year, and roughly we can say that around 23% there is an increase in suicide rate from 1999 to 2020, and the peak was in the year 2017, and thereafter the suicide rates have been declining.
One of the contributing factors to suicide can lead to lack of access to mental health care. So this visualization shows a grid map of all the 50 states of United States, which shows that among the states which had the highest percentage of adults with serious thoughts of suicide were Utah, Alaska, and Ohio. While if we look at the states with highest percentage of adults who were untreated and who had the mental health condition, these are California, Georgia, and Hawaii. Now, this is a very contrasting trend that we can see here. It gives a basis that where the work should be done.
So as we can see that suicide have been increasing in the US year by year, and suicide have been there at home as well as in the workplaces. So this is the graph demonstrating 17 states of the United States where there were suicides in the workplace for both males, females, and this is for the year 2012 and 2015. So as we can see that the construction industry and extraction is the one where males had a very high suicide rate, something around 43.6 per 100k, and for the year 2015 again we can see construction and extraction industry had the highest suicide rate, and the education training industry had the least. On the other hand, if we see in the case of females, and for the year 2012, art, design, and entertainment, sports, and those industries had a higher suicide rate in females, and the least were again the same as in males: education, training, and library. And if we see the trends in the year 2015, again arts, design, and entertainment industries have a higher suicide rate. So these are necessary to know because the policymakers can take necessary steps how to reduce the suicide in the workplaces. So this is the idiom in which we try to visualize what are the suicide rates across the different Democrat and Republican states versus different races and ethnicity. So the time frame of the data here is from the year 2016 to 2020. So as you can clearly see that in the case of Republican states, we have some higher suicide rate as compared to the Democrat states. And the race in the races and ethnicity shown, the white race had the highest suicide rate. So as we can see, the states like Pennsylvania, Ohio, they had a higher suicide rate in the case of Republican states, and in the case of Democrats, Illinois had a very high suicide rate. And as we can see here, the American Indians had suicide mostly in the Republican states and only one Democrat states. And in the case of Asians, the suicides were mostly in the Democrat states and hardly in the Republican states. So this is the graph where we try to summarize what are the suicide rates across different races and ethnicity, and just to try to see the trends in the suicide rates. So as we can see that the American Indians had a higher suicide rate throughout in the last 2 decades, with the peak in the year 2008, where the suicide rate was around 117.19 per 100,000. And the other races like whites, black, and Asians had a least suicide rate as compared to American Indians.
So now we have seen that how the suicide trends are increasing, and so we wanted to explore that what can the methods of committing suicide play an important role in this. So if we look at this in the year 2020, more than half of the suicides, or I would say 52.8% to be precise, suicides were committed using firearm, which was followed by suffocation, which is 27.2%. Then by poisoning come at third place, and the other methods, which includes cutting, drowning, and piercing. So this is a very interesting statistics that shows us where these things can play in suicides. So now we wanted to look into trends in the methods of committing suicide. So this visualization shows for the past 2 decades the trends in the methods of committing suicide between male and female for 4 methods, which are firearm, poisoning, suffocation, and other. As we can see here, for males, firearm remains the most common method of committing suicide, and this trend has been on the rise in the recent years. While the use of suffocation and poisoning has seen a slight decline in this trend, as you can see on the graph. In contrast, the females relied more on poisoning as a most common method of suicide until 2015, where after that the poisoning declined and firearm took its place by becoming the most common method among females. Also, the interesting thing is the suffocation has been on constant rise among females as a method of committing suicide. Now, we wanted to see that we have already seen that the guns are the most contributing factors in committing suicide. So we wanted to say, is there a correlation between the states which possesses more amount of guns and the suicide rate? So we plot this correlation graph, which shows that which is plotted between the percentage of household possessing guns versus suicide rate per 100k, and this data is for all the 50 states. So as we can see that there's a positive correlation here, and the guns and the household which had which possess more guns had higher suicide rate. So as you can see, the state of Wyoming had a higher suicide rate. Also, it's a state which had the highest percentage who possess the guns. Also, one of the interesting thing here is in the year 2020, all the Republican states tend to be on the upper side of the correlation, which means they tend to have higher suicide rates compared to the percentage of household possessing guns. So this showed that if the guns played a vital role in the suicide rates.
So as we saw that like in the Republican states there were very high suicide rates. So we just wanted to like see like in the states of like Wyoming, Montana, Alaska, where the suicide rates were very high, which age group and the race and ethnicity were the most effective. So in this graph we can see that if the suicide method is set as firearm and we select age group, so we can see that in the state of Wyoming, which is the Republican state, the highest suicide rates were for the age group of 85 plus, where the suicide rate was like around 439 per 1 million people. And even in the case of Montana, we can see that we had a suicide rate of 370 again for the age of 85 plus. In the case of Nevada, we again saw that 85 plus had a very high suicide rate as compared to the other age group. But the only different trend was in the state of Alaska, where young people had a very high suicide rate with the firearms, as we can see in Alaska with the age group of 15 to 24, which is nothing but like young adults. They had a very high suicide rate of around 408 per 1 million people, so which is a very different trend as compared to the other states in the US. And if we like see the race and the ethnicity, so as we can see that in the case of states like Wyoming, Montana, so in the case of Wyoming, white race had the highest suicide rate as compared to the other races, and Montana again had the highest suicide rate for American Indians or Alaskan natives. So we just tried to visualize different types of methods here, so users can like explore the data and they can find more interesting insights as per their choice. Like we can see when the suicide method was false, so we can see in the case of Hawaii, white people had a very high suicide rate as compared to all the other states in the US.
So like as we see that firearms plays a very crucial role in suicides, but does it mean that if we restrict firearms we can prevent the death rate from suicide? So we wanted to plot a graph which shows the mortality rate of firearms, and we wanted to see that are suicide more are guns used more for homicide or for suicide. So if we see in the males, the guns were used more for suicide rather than homicide, and if we see this trends remain to be same for all the races across males except for black and Hispanic, where gun death were more from homicide than suicide. If we look at the females, the gun deaths from homicide and suicide were nearly identical. Also, we can see that among females, for all the races, the deaths were more from gun were more from homicide rather than suicide, except for white females, where the deaths from a gun for suicide were way higher than homicide. So this shows that if we put restrictions on guns, or if the accessibility is restricted, we have a chance that we can prevent the death from suicides.
So as we can see that, like, suicides have been there in workplaces by different methods and among the civilian people. So we tried to identify, like, do we identify some trends in the case of veterans, the US veterans? As we know that, like, veterans usually have a hard time adjusting to the civilian life, and they suffer from PTSD, depression, and other mental health issues. So we tried to find some of the patterns in the suicide rates of veterans. So as we can see that, like, in the west region here, in the west region here, like, in the mountain states of which are like nothing but Montana, Idaho, Utah. So these states had a very high suicide rate for the veterans as compared to the other states in the US. And overall, if we see, the northeastern region is where the suicide rate was the least as compared to the other states in the US. And apart from that, as we can see that the state of Montana is where we had a very high suicide rate. So, and this graph is from the duration of 2005 to 2011. And if we see the numbers on the daily basis, the numbers are somewhere around like 17 to 20 suicides of veterans every day. So which is nothing but very alarming. So with this project, we just tried to break down the numbers and try to explore where the problem is, what method is being used the most, and how can we stop people from taking this extreme step.
So that's it from our side. Thank you for watching.